What about length of name and in regards to memorability and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, you definitely don't want a name that's overly complicated or hard to remember, or going back to the referral, a name that's hard to share. So having a name that this also may seem really straightforward, but you don't want a name that is super overly complicated. And David, I know you have a lot to say about this one, so why don't you start us off?
Yeah, you want to strike a balance. You know, I think there's often a desire nowadays, you know, to come up with some kind of name that can be used for domain names and web stuff. We'll probably touch on that concept too. And so you've had this phenomenon over the last 10 years ago where, like, I think there was a phase where everything was more random names, and now we're getting back to more like actual words in names, you know. I'm trying to think of examples, but like okay, here's a couple. I'm gonna name drop a couple products, right? These are not endorsements; they just have to be on top of mind, right? Conversa is the name of a product for like call tracking and stuff like that. There's a little bit in that name of like conversion, maybe, and that's tied to marketing. Yeah, I can see that, right? But it's a made up word, it seems, unless converse is a word somewhere. I'm not going to look it up right now. So that's a great way to like capture something that's unique, and you better get the domain name for it. But you know, and maybe it's easy to remember because it's not too long, right? And then there's other names like I don't know, like Robinhood. Isn't that the name of that app for like investing and stuff nowadays? That's in the news a lot. And I think they're having an IPO. Interesting notoriety lately with that. But I get the sense of like, all right, Robinhood. They're talking about like robbing the rich, give to the poor. So I'm like, I get it. There's a story there they're telling. It's a completely like natural language word. It's not made up. It's kind of like a name, right? So it's like a proper noun. So like that's also kind of memorable, and it's neat, and it's on the shorter side. And they can tie it to the brand. Very clever. They probably paid somebody a lot of money to give them an idea for that name for that app, right? I think those are great examples of where it can go well, you know. But I think sometimes people go off the deep end with like the uniqueness side. You know, it's like it's almost like the brand and the company name, the product name. It sounds like some kind of product for like a pharmaceutical, right? They get away with that, but that stuff is crazy, right? Nobody, you know. You remember it if it just works for you, right? But otherwise, I can't remember all the different things out there. And then on the other end, with like the regular name words, the real world name words for like a brand, it starts to sound like the like Colorado injury law firm, right? You know, it's like they could just do like CO law firm or something like that. I feel like it's gonna be background noise, right? So I don't know if I have the advice there other than like trying to balance that. You know, keep it on the shorter side if possible, but not so short that it's like acronyms or something, right? So that's my take.
Yeah, right. Make a really long name out of the words that you totally ignore. We and us, creative, would not probably carry you very far.
Probably wouldn't.
But you might be able to get the domain name. Probably not, actually. You could get the digital.
I've seen examples of people like use acronyms or like abbreviations as part of it to get something that is pointing towards the concept or what they do. And I think that can be pretty risky because if people don't immediately understand what the acronym is for, then really it's just noise. It's just like an unintelligible domain name and company name.
Just another TLA. That's a three-letter acronym.
And then there's the AAA, you know, harking back to the days of the paper yellow pages, where if you want to be visible to people, SEO ranking for the Stone Age, to be ranking well in yellow page books, you know what, you have AAA plumbing or something like that, because that shows up at the top of the alphabetical list, right? You know,
absolute, affordable, automatic something.
A aardvark is the one I remember. They get you 3 A's like right up front. I'm like, that's funny. Had nothing to do with the plumbing company in any way.
Well, that's my take on names. It's not super compelling, I suppose, but strike a balance. That's
and that was actually a really good point, though, because domain name is very much an extremely real consideration, because that, you know, in this day and age, that is your storefront for most people. And so it's critical that you name it something that hasn't already been secured by somebody else where you can't really get it. You know, that's a big consideration. What's that domain name going to be? But when they opened it up to, more of the, I guess, Class A, beyond .com, I know that when there was only .com available, there was a pretty big run on those names. Every word that in the universe that's less than 6 or 8 characters has been purchased. And I think as it expanded, that produced more opportunities for people to actually name it something more natural.
Yes, absolutely. And making sure that you have that domain name available really goes back to a name that's memorable and a website that's memorable. And also that also ties into being confused with someone else, because if you like someone else's company name and try and name your company similarly and change a few things, there's a good chance that they're going to end up at that other person's website because they have a good domain for it. And I think that one really ties everything we talked about together, having a name that's memorable, a name that resonates with your audience, a name that isn't confused with anyone else, and it's not overly complicated. All of that ties into having the available domain and the easy to remember domain.
Which is why it's really tough to pick a good company name.
Yes, and also an easy to type domain. Like any of our last names as a company name would probably be a little difficult.
Yeah, mine was available completely, but nobody ever remembered it.
Yeah, very true.
If we wanted to start like a consulting firm of scientists, we'd be set.
But
Zonka, Joswiak, and DeGurley Consulting.
.net.
.net, yeah, .ai.
And nobody could ever get to it unless it was on a search engine.
We'd never have anybody with the same name.
And we'd also never have anybody who could type our domain in.
That's funny.
We'd have to buy every domain name that was mistyped, which would be a lot. Hi, this is Sarah from Denver Data Web. Thanks for watching. Please like our video and subscribe for future digital strategy chats. You can also visit our website at denverdata.com or find us on social media at Denver Data Web.